The follow-up to the election is still in a state of disarray, and we have just two questions for Bill Whittle tonight on Bill Whittle Now. I'm Scott Ott, and this program is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com who make it all possible. Bill, it's really hard to keep up with the hour-by-hour changes in the news. Today was no exception to that as we record this on Monday evening. The transition to the Biden administration has been stymied by the fact that an appointee of President Trump's at the General Services Administration has essentially not written the letter that's required to give the office space and the funds and the other kinds of access needed for the new team of the incoming president-elect. President Trump today on Twitter fired his Secretary of Defense. Reports from CNN and elsewhere indicate that he might be prepared to do the same thing with the director of the CIA and possibly with the FBI director. Joe Biden's margin in the continuing count with something like 50,000 votes yet to be counted in Pennsylvania continues to grow. And Bill, I really just have two questions, and they're really inspired by letters that have been written to us, mostly by members at BillWhittle.com. And the two questions are these, and I'll give them both to you, and you can take them in whichever order you prefer. But number one is, where is this process going? In other words, how would you like to see this play out? And number two is, if you are among the people who believe that something nefarious and corrupt has happened in the course of this election, what can you do about it going forward in the future?
First of all, you referred to Joe Biden as the president-elect. He's not the president-elect. The definition of the president-elect is the status of the candidate after he is elected by the electors on the Wednesday following the second Monday of December, which is December 14th. The president, Joe Biden, has not been elected president. He will be elected president if nothing changes on the 14th of December by the electors at the Electoral College. And from the point of his election at the Electoral College until his inauguration on January 20th or January 21st, if January 20th should fall on a Sunday, then he will be president-elect. While the election is still being contested, he's just another guy. And I refuse to fall into this pattern of ongoing hypnosis of the society by agreeing to call him that. He's not the president-elect. He will be the president-elect when the legal issues are resolved and the electors make their decision. And from that point until his inauguration, he'll be president-elect. And if he doesn't get to that point, then he won't be anything. He'll just be Joe Biden, which is what he is right now. Now, as far as the do I think nefarious things have happened? I categorically do. And
no, I'm not asking you if you think that. That's clear over the last several episodes we've done. My question is, how do you see this process playing out?
It's going to play out in the courts. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, and Trump's team will present evidence that voter fraud occurred, and then there will be a decision made as to whether or not this voter fraud was significant enough to change the election. But frankly, they should be recounting every single vote in those battleground states right now. I want them all recounted, and I want them to be matched to a person who is alive at a particular address. And if they're not willing to do that, then it makes me wonder why. If it turns out that this is a free and fair election, as the Democrats claim, then a recount should further cement their confidence in their victory and would certainly go a long way in convincing a lot of the other Trump supporters that this was, in fact, a free and fair election. If we hear any pushback about counting on those votes whatsoever, then we have pretty good evidence that there's a good reason why they don't want to recount those votes.
Now, Bill, you've mentioned this point before, and I'll tell you, I listened, by the very nature of the research I have to do this program, I listen to a lot of what you might classify as the left-wing media. I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post, and I don't really hear anybody on the left who's saying, don't recount the votes. That doesn't seem to be a thing among them.
Fabulous. Well, then we're in for a much better future than I had originally thought.
So you see this as this is going forward. Obviously, you're not just hoping to have legal challenges that go work their way up to the Supreme Court. You're hoping for something beyond that. What do you think is really going to happen through this process?
What I want to have happen is I want an accurate vote. If Joe Biden wins the election by one individual vote in one battleground state, and that gives him the election, then he will be the president of the United States legitimately. And I won't like that, but that will be something I will accept because that's the contract I have with my government. We decide who gets to be in power, and as long as we decide, we're willing to be ruled by these people. So, well, I'm not saying I want Joe Biden to become president, but I am saying that if it turns out that a recount, an authentic recount of the legal votes cast shows that he was elected president, then all of my objections go away, all of them, and I will continue to be a subject of the United States government, and I will not use ridiculous terms like Joe Biden is not my president. I'm a citizen of the United States. If Joe Biden is legally elected president of the United States and he is the president of the United States and I'm a citizen of the United States, that makes him my president.
How much human fallibility can you stomach in that process? Because you put a very fine point on it by saying if he won by a single vote. What if there were a small number of illegally cast ballots? Like, where's your threshold where you say, okay, well, there were some illegally cast ballots. That's okay. No, there were too many. How do you know where that breaking point is?
Well, since all of the illegally counted votes all seem to be going in the same direction, I think the obvious answer is, at what point do these illegally counted votes make up the difference between victory and defeat in these battleground states?
So that would be it. If the corruption or the fraud or whatever it was that caused these ballots to be miscast, if that got to the point where, for example, Joe Biden wasn't up by 45,000 votes in Pennsylvania, he was actually down by 5,000 votes, that would make a difference.
It would make a difference as far as the outcome goes, but frankly, I think if we can find evidence of this kind of corruption on this scale that I suspect exists, then whether or not those vote counts get to be enough to legitimately put Joe Biden into the presidency, then nevertheless, the people responsible for that voter fraud need to be punished severely. And this is my enormous concern. People say, well, okay, it's, may end up being better and blah, 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 blah. No, this is it. If they get away with this, they will be in a stronger position to get away with it next time. If there's fraud. Now, if there's no fraud, then there's no harm and then there's no foul.
How will you be satisfied of that, though? That's what I'm really getting at, because I don't know what that threshold is where you or folks who think like you would say, yeah, that seems fair.
No, that's easy enough to answer. What I want to see is in these battleground states, I want to see these ballots, and I want to see the ballots that are marked, and I want them to be confirmed that they go to the address that the person is living in and that they have a signature on them, and that the signatures are different from one another. One of the many reasons that I think there's this very, very foul play going on here, two of them are simple, really. One of them is that historically, about 3% of the people who vote in this nation, and this is a fairly solid figure going on throughout the recent several decades, if not longer, that of the votes that are cast by either party in the United States of America, something like 3% of the total votes counted on either side are votes only for the president. In other words, 3% of the total votes that are cast historically are just for the president, with no other votes being cast for anybody down the ticket. My understanding is that some of the votes coming out of Biden's precincts have a percentage of votes that are only for the president in the neighborhood of 16%, 24%. That is mathematically suspicious to me. The other thing that I'm mathematically suspicious of is any indication that that the turnout for Joe Biden was higher than the turnout for Barack Obama in these predominantly Black Democratic neighborhoods. If I hear that Joe Biden got more of a turnout, I'm not talking about total numbers because the population increases, but if Joe Biden got a higher percentage of turnout in 2020 than Barack Obama did in 2008 or 2012, did I get that right? What am I missing?
I think you're right.
2008, it's 16. Yeah, it's been, okay. In 2008 or 2012, then I'm going to be suspicious of that. Large numbers of blacks have shifted towards Donald Trump. Maybe they were enough to swing the election, maybe they weren't. But if it turns out, put aside the actual vote count, if Joe Biden, and by the look of some of these numbers, Joe Biden is outperforming Barack Obama by 20 points, maybe in some cases, in some of these neighborhoods, I find that deeply, deeply suspicious. Especially,
one of the news stories,
since a lot of those ballots don't go down, since a lot of those ballots are just for president. You may be able to make the case that, well, black people are really concerned about their future, in which case they would come out in record numbers and they would also go down the ballot. But both of those things together are extremely suspicious to me. Now, I'm not saying those happened, but I'm saying there's evidence that they did. So let's count them and find out.
I will tell you there, as somebody who has analyzed voting patterns in one particular county in Pennsylvania a few years back. It stunned me how few people vote in local elections compared to the presidential election. It's just overwhelming. You get this, all of a sudden you get this flood of turnout in a presidential election year, and in off years, nothing. And even down ballot, a lot of times people are like, I don't really know anything about these other people. Here's
what you should, what I would be watching out for in terms of turnout.
Okay.
If we have an idea that black turnout in states that are solidly blue and solidly red is around the same number as a percentage of the black vote, and then we see that the percentage of and we see much greater turnout numbers in these battleground states, especially these specific precincts in battleground states, then that is corruption to a mathematical certainty. There is no possible explanation. There is a possible explanation for why black voters would come out stronger for Biden than Obama, although I certainly can't think of one. But if that were the case, then they would come out in record numbers all across the country and not in record numbers just in these key precincts in key battleground states. If that's what we find in terms of turnout, that is an extremely powerful indicator that there's something fishy going on here. And that is what the preliminary reports are showing.
And one of the underplayed stories of the week has been the performance of Donald Trump. He actually grew his support in the African-American community. He grew his support in the Latino community and did surprisingly well there. That is a story that you hear now and then, but it hasn't been getting as much play as some other things, obviously because the mainstream media doesn't believe that he came out on top, and so the point is moot. Bill, let's go ahead.
That also goes to, just very briefly, that also goes to the Biden-Trump ratios. You cannot find 100 ballots. If you were to legitimately collect 100 ballots, you will never find 100 ballots all for Joe Biden. And the numbers of ballots that are being reported that are all for Joe Biden are much, much, much higher than that. But statistically, finding 100 ballots in an election like this it's zero. The nearest whole number of that happening in terms of chance of it being real is zero. So that's another thing to look for. And then there's this violation of, I want to say it's Benwin's law. It's a violation of a statistical law that basically says that as time goes on, the election results proceed smoothly along an arc so that the last votes counted become basically, the count gets higher at a smooth rate. But in some of the battleground states, instead of it being higher, which it is for Trump and it is for Biden in non-battleground states, it's Biden goes higher, lower. And that is a statistical anomaly that has no explanation other than pumping votes into the system prior to a normal count. And there seems to be evidence of that as well. So math doesn't lie.
So let's finish up on something that I've gotten letters from several of our members about this specific question in their frustration as to how things have played out so far and their belief that fraud and corruption were involved in the balloting process. They are pleading with you to say, what can we actually do other than just talking about it and complaining about it, or saying that Joe Biden is not the president-elect and may never be? What can we really do in the future to bring integrity to the voting process? And not just theoretically, Bill. They're not asking theoretically. They mean, if you were to pick up the phone and call them, what would you tell them to go do right now?
I would tell them to prepare to have two standards of behavior towards these people that you inhabit this country with. When you find out, and we've been talking about electronic voting machines forever, but when you find out that the voting machines are manufactured by a company that Nancy Pelosi's heavily invested in, and Dianne Feinstein and all the rest, and that they're electronic voting machines with no way to tell whatsoever other than somebody saying, I promise that these are accurate, then there is no way to restore confidence in that vote. And so when you say, what do we do in the future to make elections fairer? My reply would be, well, we would do paper balloting, but we'd only do paper balloting in the states that Donald Trump won. And if Donald Trump won states that have been taken away by things like switching votes through Dominion program, which is the name of the software that runs these voting machines, then those tides will become stronger in the next 4 years, not weaker, because they'll have gotten away with it. Number one, they'll have the Justice Department and the Attorney General back in their pocket. Number two, which is why personally I think, just as an example of how this criminal activity seems to work, the CEO of Twitter, Jack, I want to say Dempsey, but it's not Dempsey, Jack
Dorsey.
You know who I'm talking about, Dorsey. Jack Dorsey was questioned by Ted Cruz under oath on October 28th, I think about, little under a week before the election. And he swore that Twitter does not interfere in presidential elections, was challenged by Ted Cruz about that under oath. Within 24 hours of the start of the election day, Dorsey and Twitter were simply blocking tweets issued by the President of the United States of America, blocking them, making them difficult to share, making them difficult to retweet, and so on. So my observation here is that why would a man who is under such intense scrutiny by a sitting member of Congress in an ongoing investigation swear under oath that Twitter does not influence in any way elections and that whatever may have happened in the past was an aberration, and that he is aware of the fact that he swore under oath that this isn't occurring? Why would he then go and block the tweets of the President of the United States less than a week after his testimony if he wasn't utterly convinced that the election of a new president would mean the election of a new Attorney General and a new Justice Department and no consequences for doing what he's doing?
Now, I'm off Twitter. Frankly, are you saying that Twitter blocked President Trump before the end of the voting on Election Day?
My understanding is that they blocked one of his tweets on election night, but there's no question they blocked his tweets starting the next day. So,
technically still honest in front of the Senate panel, because he said he's not affecting the election. He's not tweeting during the campaign process, but
nice
in the aftermath.
Nice try there, Trevor Bin Laden. But no, the election is contested. The election has gone to the courts. There is an official contest. The election is contested. A winner has not been declared. No one has conceded. The electors haven't voted. And so this election is still completely wide open. It is still a live election and will be until the court makes its ruling and the electors make the Electoral College decision on the 14th of December. So he is interfering with the election.
So the upshot of your answer on the previous question, and I'm sorry to go back to the Twitter thing because that's not as significant, I don't think, for the people who are asking these questions, is what they can do is try to work at the state and local level to change the kind of processes that are used to tabulate votes?
My answer to the people who are asking this question is, at the moment, I do not see an answer for how you fix the corruption in states like California and other states where voting machines are electronically recording votes, and those voting machines are owned by people who have a very clear agenda and an extreme lack of moral standing or any other shred of integrity that would lead you to believe that these things are being done honestly. I don't know how people in the great state of Tennessee, let's say, or Kansas, have any way to affect the electronic voting machines in places like Philadelphia, Detroit, or any of these other places. I don't see how they do that. And so unless we are able to make a decision to eliminate them as a country, then we're stuck. And we are stuck because the Democrats are going to continue to want to use these voting machines because these voting machines have one extremely, extremely attractive feature. And that is that there is no paper trail that can be verified by a independent third-party witness. There is no way to verify it. And so the two great threats to the American electoral system in terms of people's confidence, one of them is mail-in voting and the other one is electronic vote counting. Both of them have put into play. Both of them are suspicious. Both of them show evidence of having been tampered with. And if they get away with this election, then the chances of them increasing their control over those things goes up, not down. And that's when we are going to have to decide what we do with the 70 million voters and probably the 150 million total people who still understand what a republic is and still have respect for the institutions of that republic. Because by that point, it will be crystal clear that the leadership of one party is not only determined to destroy those institutions, but has in fact done it, if that's what eventually comes to pass, and that the middle third of the country has been so corrupted by things like Twitter blocking access to news stories that are detrimental to Joe Biden, and things like newscasters referring to Joe Biden as president-elect. This pervasive corruption and this pervasive influence is not something that people in a red state have any control over in terms of a blue state. That's why I think that if this happens and they get away with this, it's going to be time for us to begin to start thinking of ourselves as Americans who have had their government stolen, but not their country. And we will have to determine how honorable people can continue to deal with honorable people without letting dishonorable people steal all of their freedoms away. That's going to be a unique challenge for us in the future, one way or another. And I still maintain that when it's all said and done, the ultimate objective of the people behind this was not to get Joe Biden elected. That's just a benefit. The main objective was to get the American people to no longer believe in their electoral system. And once you get that to happen, then the left really does gain power. And it's not the power over changing the vote. It's much, much more subtle and much more important than that. And it is something that we control and not them. If they are able to pull this off and destroy Americans' faith in the electoral system, then the tendency will be for us to view elections the way that most other countries in the world view them, the way that my Russian wife viewed them back in Russia. The fix is in. There's nothing you can do about it. The whole thing's a scam. Just keep your head down and go about your business, and maybe people will let you make a little money or whatever, as long as you don't call too much attention to yourself. If we get to that place, then my primary responsibility will be to make sure that we maintain that attitude towards the people that are in favor of these policies without destroying our ability to speak with each other and deal with each other honorably and honestly and above board and with full confidence. That will be a large challenge. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There are legal challenges in there, and if this voting fraud is as real as I think it is, then having a recount of those votes should indicate large amounts of fraud. And by the way, if it turns out that there is systemic voter fraud, and it's all going one way, then it doesn't even have to be enough voter fraud to steal the margin of victory. Because if there's that kind of fraud going that way, you really have no idea what actually happened. You can find false ballots, but you can't tell how many might have been destroyed or lost or whatever the case may be. So what we do know is that there is a political party that is determined to destroy any protection of the American electoral system. This is the party that doesn't want voter registration. This is the party that doesn't demand IDs to go and vote. This is the party that wants illegal aliens and criminals to be able to vote. It's not a bipartisan thing. It's not something that goes both ways. There's one party that wants to make sure that Americans are legally able to cast a vote, and only Americans and only legal votes. And then there are the Democrats that want to do everything possible to make sure that doesn't happen. And you have to ask yourself, why would they be so willing to open up so many avenues of depriving people of legitimate legal votes? Why would they be interested in doing that? My only conclusion would be that they cannot win otherwise. The people that have pulled this off are nefarious, and they're devious, and they're cunning. And because we're honest people, we have allowed them to get away with it because, frankly, it's beyond our imagining that people could be so low. But if this turns out to be the case, then that's that. But let me just remind people of one thing. If this is in fact the case, if this voter fraud does turn up, and even if it sticks, this will be the third sneak attack on the United States in its history. And that'll be the second one that I've lived through. November 3rd will go into the same books as September 11th and December 7th. And I would remind our members that in the days following those other sneak attacks, everything was gray, everything was black, everything was filled with despair, everything was absolutely nothing but gloom and doom and despair. And it was for many months. But after many months went by, the United States of America rallied, and the people that launched those sneak attacks on this government and this republic and these people are no longer with us. The Empire of Japan is no longer with us. Tojo did not survive a year after the war. Bin Laden is no longer with us. Al-Qaeda is no longer with us. If this is in fact the case, look, if there was no voter fraud, that's actually a relief for me, enormous relief. But if it turns out that was the case and they so-called get away with it, what they're going to find is they're going to find out the same thing that bin Laden found out, and they're going to find out the same thing that the Japanese found out, that because we're nice and polite and kind and don't demonstrate in the streets and don't burn buildings down, it does not mean that we're weak, and it doesn't mean that we're stupid. It just means it takes a lot to get us angry, and now we're angry.
The members of BillWhittle.com have made this program possible, and their ranks are growing and growing rapidly in the wake of this week's final election day. We're grateful for all those new members, and it's exciting to see their contributions already on the member blog and in the comments sections and in the notes that they send to us. So thank you very much for that. If you have not yet joined their ranks, time's a wasting. We may not always have an opportunity to have programs like this, and we're grateful to be able to do it. We can only do it because folks like you went to BillWhittle.com and clicked that big green Become a Member button. Why don't you do that right now? For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.